Hey guys, and welcome back to the podcast. Really excited to be joined by Steve Flink, and we are going to be diving into the Wimbledon 2025 review. Met Steve in person again at Wimbledon as well, so great meeting you, Steve, there. And how was your experience, and I guess the tournament as a whole as well?
Well, I enjoyed it immensely. I was there for the last 8 days, starting with the middle Sunday, and I had a great time. And that, of course, we had that hot weather at the end. But overall, I thought we had a very good tournament, fitting final for the men. Somewhat shocking scoreline for the women, but a tremendous performance from the champion. So I thought it was a terrific tournament.
Yeah, 100%. I was thoroughly tanned as well in the very hot weather here in the UK, so I can't complain. And yeah, it was a record. I think it was the hottest Wimbledon for quite some time. So I think that suited, especially the winner on the women's side in Iga Swiatek. And she, as you said, had a record-breaking final, winning against Amanda Anisimova 6-love, 6-love, so a double bagel. And it's the first time we've had a double bagel at Wimbledon since 1911, if I'm not mistaken. So that was
that's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Dorothea Lambert-Chambers over Dora Boothby. Those are household names, or they were household names a century ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I think the winner in 1911, I've heard that there's stories of her serving like 136 miles per hour. People were saying there's anecdotes apparently. So which I didn't know. I wasn't too clued up on it.
I don't know how that's probably distorted. I have no idea where that one came from because they didn't have power like that in those days. But it's intriguing to hear it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And of course, on the men's side, we had a very, I would say, entertaining final. Not as entertaining as Roland Garros final that we had for Jannik and Carlos, but very spoiled to get yet another Grand Slam final between these two after not having any, of course, before Roland Garros this year.
Right, and of course we should explain, Faizan, that they might have, with some luck, but they were so often on the same half of the draw. If you look at 2022 with that epic quarterfinal at the U.S. Open that Alcaraz won from match point down over Sinner in 5, that was
Roland Garros last year.
Round of 16 at Wimbledon that same year. So they were often thrown into the same half, and then finally they got to the top of the rankings together at 1 and 2, and that's made all the difference. Because so from here for quite some time now, they are going to be meeting only in finals, which is the way it should be.
100%. Yeah, of course. Last year they met at Roland Garros, and it was the semi-finals.
Yes,
and
yes,
that was, of course, as you say, it's one of the, not the issue, but it was just the way the rankings was. Zverev was number 2, and then at that time, and Carlos was at 3, and they just didn't quite have, and the draw kept on falling, that they ended up being in the same half. But this year it's been different. We've got it back to back, and they've now between them won the last 7 Grand Slams. So a very dominant run from that duo. I guess before we jump into the men's, I wanted to touch upon the women's. As we said, a historic final. Were you in the stadium for the final, Steve? I'm assuming you were.
Yes, I was. Sitting a little bit several rows up from where you and I watched the Djokovic-Cavalli match. And of course, at that stage through the quarters, just to explain to the audience, the press that comes into center court can sit pretty much anywhere they want. They don't make you sit in your seat. Then you get to the semis and finals, and you must go to the assigned seat. So I was several rows up from where you and I watched together, and that was some performance from Iga. I wanted to say at the outset, Faizan, that the emphasis has been so heavily on Anisimova's anxiety. No doubt about it. It was, even the casual fan could see how tight she was. It was palpable. But I don't think enough has been said about the perfection of Swiatek. There isn't any other player in the world that would have taken Anisimova, even a nervous one, apart love and love. It simply would not have happened. So I really believe that people need to look a little bit more about how unrelenting Iga was, how ruthless she was, how efficient she was. She was just bearing down so hard on every point. It's interesting because her idol, one of her idols certainly, is Rafa Nadal. And we all talked about how what was the story of Nadal? You play every point like a match point. That's the way she played this final. So I looked at it more in I felt badly. All of us had sympathy for Anisimova. I don't want to sound like I didn't feel she belonged, because she did, and she had a great tournament, and she earned her way into that final, and a great win over Sabalenka in the semis. But I think all credit to Iga for let's not forget it was 2-love over Bencic in the semis. So she loses 2 games in her last 4 sets, and Bencic is a wily veteran, so consistent from the backcourt. No, you don't beat her 2-love without playing great tennis. So she beat 2 very different players. One of them much more percentage-oriented, consistent, gets a lot of balls back, cunning, strategic, all the great qualities of a veteran. And the other one, a big hitter, who's learning to harness it much better than she ever did before. But it didn't make much difference. Iga just took them both apart. So I was really highly impressed, well, frankly, with her whole tournament. Losing 1 set, knocking off the likes of Towson and Samsonova. I mean, she beat a lot of very good players in straight, and then finished it off with her absolute best tennis in the last 2 rounds. I'm just so encouraged about the recovery she's made in this short span of time. A terrible clay court circuit by her standards. Managed to then make her way into the semis of Roland Garros, which was a step in the right direction, and took a set of Sabalenka and lost 6-love in the third, but you could tell she was getting better, and then loses the grass court final to Pegula, but played well. And then all the way from a semi to a final to finally another title, her first since Roland Garros a year ago, and it's Wimbledon. And even she admitted that wasn't really her mindset going into the tournament. I don't think she really thought she was going to win the tournament. She was going to try, but everything unfolded. So I must say, I've gone from being very pessimistic about short term for her to very optimistic short and long term, because I think this win is going to stay with her a long, long time. It's that old cliche really applies here. She reminded herself who she is. She reminded us who she is. And now her psyche has changed again, and her game has come around, and it doesn't mean she's going to be just dominating across the board and never losing. There are top players that can beat her on their days, but she's going to be right in there with everybody. And my hope is the best way we could end this Grand Slam season, Faizan, would be for Sabalenka to meet Swiatek in the final of the U.S. Open. There could be no better conclusion to the women's season than that. And I think there's a reasonable chance we get it, because as much as Sabalenka struggled, she was in the finals of the first 2 slams of the season and the semis here at Wimbledon. It's not as if she had terrible early round losses. She's still been immensely consistent. And Iga, I expect her to ride the wave of this triumph, have a good summer. I don't know if she wins a title over the summer or not, but I expect her to win a lot of matches. And then come into the Open flying high, determined to win her 2nd title there. So I must say, I'm very happy for her and for the women's game. Some stability, bringing this stability back. We've had this run of 9 champions and over different champions, but she now is very unlike most of the others who won it, who were unable to back it up. She had already won 4 French. She had already won 1 U.S. Open. She's got 6 majors now, and I think this was good for the women's game. A familiar face coming through at Wimbledon, but unexpectedly.
Yeah, 100%. Very good for the women's game. And to your point on Sabalenka, I think she is well in front in terms of the race to, I think it'll be Riyadh and in the WTA rankings, and she extended her lead even after the semi-final berth, because she didn't play Wimbledon last year as well due to injury. But she has been the most consistent player this year. But for Iga, a very good tournament, and Sabalenka was 1 set away from making that a final at Wimbledon, which would have been really interesting. But hopefully, you do get it at the US Open, because that would be a fitting way to end the year, as you said, especially with Grand Slams. And I think that for Iga,
just wanted to throw in also kind of neutral turf for both. You'd say that maybe Sabalenka is slightly more comfortable on hard, but only slightly. And when Iga's playing the kind of tennis she did at Wimbledon, She can transfer that to the hard courts, and they both could go in there believing they're going to win, believing that their best tennis is going to be good enough to win. And now it's a chance, hopefully, for this rivalry to finally unfold the way we hoped it would.
Yeah, they haven't played a Grand Slam. We were talking about Sinner and Alcaraz, but they haven't actually played a Grand Slam final yet.
Right.
Right. So, and I think the Australian Open would be more in favour for Sabalenka because the hard courts are quicker than the US, and we know Roland Garros is probably going to suit Iga more. So I think the US Open is, as you said, it's a balanced tournament and surface for a final. So that would be interesting for sure. But on Iga, I think her press conference was really good. I managed to get a question into her in the final press conference after she won, and I essentially asked her what did she think about winning Wimbledon, where did she rank it amongst her other Grand Slam triumphs? And she didn't say specifically from 1 to 6 how she ranked them, but she essentially alluded to the fact that Wimbledon was very special because, as you said, she didn't actually ever expect to win Wimbledon.
Right.
In her mind, grass was just not a surface that she expected to do well enough on to actually win a Grand Slam title on. So for her, it was extra special, I think. And she very carefully said that she essentially is expected to do well on clay. And I think we know that. And at Roland Garros, she is the favourite every year at the moment. And then I think on hard court, we know she's had good results. So she did say the US Open was also special, but in her eyes, I think winning Wimbledon, to paraphrase, I think, because she didn't want to quite say it, although she did say it and then retract it throughout her statement, was that it is, in her eyes, probably the most special win to date anyway. And it's amazing that she's never lost a Grand Slam final now. She's 6 in Grand Slam finals.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's remarkable. Let's face it. It's going to happen to every player, though. You're going to lose one somewhere along the line. We found that out with Carlos. He'd never lost one either. And so Iga, somewhere along the line, Iga will lose one. But I suspect that when her career ends, she's still going to maintain a very healthy record in finals, that she won't lose too many. She seems to know how to prime for those occasions. One other point regarding this Sabalenka-Swiatek matchup that we want to see on big occasions. We were so close in Australia because Iga had match point against Keys in the semifinals, and one more point and she's in the final playing Sabalenka. We could have had it. That would have been nice to see it happen there. So we've been close. And then you look at Wimbledon and Sabalenka's, as you say, I mean, she's in a third set. She's right in there. In fact, she was 5-2 down in the third and got it back to 4-5, serving for 5-all. So she wasn't that far away either from making the final there. So we've had two kind of close calls as far as the two of them meeting in title round clashes at the majors. So that's why I think it would be all the more fitting that they both get there in New York and both get there in top form and give us a great show.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And on Anisimova, I think she, as you said, she definitely deserved to be in the final. It was a shame that I think she ran a little bit empty in terms of her tank in the final. She just wasn't able to find the level that she had throughout the tournament, especially against Sabalenka. I think they took a lot out of her. She mentioned that in her post-match press conference, that I think mentally and physically, and given it's her first Grand Slam final, she's probably physically not used to making the stage of a tournament. She was also kind of flexing her shoulder when I was watching her in practice. We asked her about that. She said, it might be a little bit of an issue. She didn't feel like she served that well throughout the tournament and essentially had to fight her way into the final. So she was saying the positive is that she didn't feel that she was playing her best level throughout the tournament, yet she still made the Grand Slam final. Probably akin, similar to what Fritz said last year at the US Open when he lost to Sinner. But she thinks that going forward, if she can improve on her serve, then she should put herself in these types of positions again, hopefully. So I think that was obviously a little bit of a shame. She definitely froze due to nerves and admitted to that as well. So it seemed like it was a combination of factors, but didn't get the final we wanted, but some very impressive performances. I was in the stadium. I think you were as well for Sabalenka and Anisimova. I think I did see you in there. And I thought that was one of my picks of Wimbledon on the women's side as well. and I thought she applied herself really well in the tournament. What did you think of her run generally, Steve?
Yeah, no, listen, I think the important thing, I agree with everything you just said. I think what's important, Faizan, is that you can't lose sight, and her camp is going to remind her that she needs to reflect on it herself. You've told her before the tournament you're going to get to the here's the deal. You'll get to the Wimbledon final, but you won't lose a game. I won't win a game.
Yeah.
Will you take it? Of course you take it.
Yeah,
of course you take it. And what she has to remind herself is, look, it took a lot of great tennis to get you to the final. You faced somebody who was so efficient and so determined and unwavering and so concentrated. It was also her. You give credit there, and yes, you didn't play the level you wanted, but it doesn't change the fact that you got to the final. If she loses that final 6-7, 7-6, 7-6, she's still a finalist and not a champion. In some ways, I think those are more painful. I think she should be able to put this aside more easily and realize, okay, it wasn't her day. Iga was tremendous, but you're a Wimbledon finalist, and that's more than she could have anticipated going into the tournament. And so I think as these days are unwinding now, and she gets some distance from the tournament, that she will sort that out in her mind, and her coaches will, and she's going to be pleased to be in the top 10. And that tournament was a triumph for her, with or without what happened in the final.
100%. I remember interviewing her qualifying at Wimbledon last year, and she lost in the final round to Ivelisse. And I talked to her a couple of times in the first and second rounds of qualifying, and I remember her saying vividly that it was great being at Roehampton and playing qualifying, but it wasn't where she wanted to be. It was her first time at qualifying at Wimbledon. She obviously wanted to be in the main draw. And she said this year that she was heartbroken when she didn't qualify. And obviously that was a big setback for her in her comeback, where she was very fresh off her comeback last year as well at that point. So given the progression from then until today, it's been phenomenal. So I think we have to give a lot of kudos to her and her team as well, and the people around her that she's, but especially Amanda, that she's managed to find her way back and now in a career high position in the top 10, which is incredibly impressive.
You know, Faizan, I also thought it was very poignant what happened after the final. Obviously, she was very teary, and she was choking up, and understandably so, that she wished she could have performed better, and nobody wants to be losing love in a Wimbledon final. But the way that they handled it, especially Annabelle Croft, who was interviewing her, was really commendable, because she allowed her time to calm down and give her answers, and she was able to sort of find her poise and respond and say some very nice things about her mother and her coaches, everything. And I thought that was nice, really beautifully handled by the BBC and by Croft, and Anisimova was therefore able to come out of it more comfortably than she would have. But she should be very proud, and over time she will be.
Yes, I agree. What did you think of the very quickly? I mean, it's not a particularly big point, but I heard a lot of people saying that at Wimbledon, with the on-court interviews, they felt that, especially in finals, they should just essentially give the player the microphone rather than like maybe instigating and instrumenting like the on-court interview, because when they come into the presser, they get similar questions, I guess. Did you have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, it's the first I've heard. That's interesting. I don't think I would agree. I think that, I think most of the BBC interviewers, their questions are usually pretty good, and I think some players would be more comfortable taking the mic and initiating it than others. So I would be worried that some of them would freeze and not quite know what to say. But you give them a question, and then they can run with it, whatever direction they want to go. So I would not be in favor of just handing them the mic. My gripe is, you know so well, and thankfully you are such an exception to the rule personally, of the types of questions you will ask players in press conferences. But you and I have discussed this privately. I want to bring it up here, that I feel it's so important that questions I don't think the public hears enough. The press doesn't, nor does the public, get enough post-match analysis and perspective from the players on crucial junctures in the match, and what happened and why it happened and what was going through their mind. And it's very non-specific. They may get asked for an overview of the match, but they don't get asked about the critical facets of it. And that you are really an exception to that rule, because you try to get it in early and ask these players those questions, and you get some very good responses. And I'm not saying that to flatter you. I've observed it firsthand, especially at Wimbledon. And I wish more people approached it like you did. But unfortunately, a lot of the media, and I can't knock them, it's their job. They have different angles they need to cover. But too often it's not related to the match itself, to the actual tennis. It's everything but the actual tennis. And that, I find that frustrating. And sometimes those, to get back to the BBC people, they manage to get some pretty good stuff out there. They don't get too specific either. I would like to see them do it more too. But at least they keep things focused on what just occurred, what they just witnessed.
Yeah, I agree. On the women's, Steve, is there anything else you want to touch upon? Obviously, on the men's and women's, there are a lot of seeds early.
No, good tournament for Bencic. Nice to see her in the penultimate round. She's a very likable person. Is she very Swiss? Yes. I just think she has a certain quiet charm, and she's a mother now. And I heard her talking a lot about that, about she doesn't get as uptight as she used to. There's still a tension and a natural pre-match nerves, but that her whole way of thinking has changed, and obviously that's being a mother. So I thought that was nice. Bad luck for her, just like Anisimova, to catch Swiatek at her zenith and not be able to get more games. But I thought she had a terrific win over Andreeva in 2 tiebreaks.
Yeah.
That's a nice performance. That to me was one of the highlights of the women's tournament, that match.
Agreed.
Because they went through the first set without breaking each other. They exchanged breaks late in the second. What a refreshing type of women's match where they were holding that frequently. And that's because they backed up their serve so well. They both were so strategic and so sound. So that was one of my favorite matches of the tournament, and might have been my favorite women's match, was that match between Andreeva and Bencic.
Yeah, that was a really good match, actually, because I think Andreeva went into it a favorite despite the age gap and the experience gap. But we know how well she's played this year. But Bencic, as you mentioned before, is a very wily operator, and I think she had a very good game plan, and she just managed the tiebreakers better. I think Andreeva maybe overused the forehand slice in some of the tight moments, and she could have. I think she ended up getting a little bit tight with the age and the inexperience, and she was trying to force Bencic into mistakes with the forehand slice, and I think it's a good weapon or variation for her to use, and I think she utilized it normally quite well. But I think it was maybe her downfall towards the end of those sets in the big moments. But she'll bounce back, and she's very good on hard courts as well. So they should both have hopefully strong ends to the year as well.
I agree with all of that. And look, that the analysis you just gave on Andreeva was very accurate. But she's still so young. We forget that she's got so much to learn about match play, and it's happening pretty quickly for her. And I feel like we're going to be saying some very different things about her 1 year from now. In other words, I believe she will improve enormously in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yes, I agree 100%. 100% on that. Steve, I think before we move on to the men, so that was your favorite match on the women's side. Actually, one thing I wanted to quickly touch on was Jessica Pegula losing in the first round, because she came off the bad Homburg tournament, beating Iga Swiatek, of course, in the final. So there were big expectations on her, and especially now, looking in hindsight, and hindsight, of course, is a beautiful thing, you think, wow, that loss is even more surprising. What are your thoughts around her?
I was disappointed. It doesn't happen to Jess very often. She can get picked off early, but she's been, obviously the U.S. Open was her best major yet, and it was a terrific run to the finals, and I think winning that title, as you mentioned, should have given her the encouragement. It makes me wonder, though, sometimes whether players like her suffer for having played an event the week before. It's too close. You know, you're not content, but you're happy and you feel like a winner and you've won a title, and it's always a special feeling to win any tournament. And she had that, and then suddenly you're out there a few days later, you're playing the first round of Wimbledon and you're getting annihilated. And she, you know, who's to say that maybe might have been different had she practiced the week before? I can't say that I knock her schedule or that it was wrong to play that tournament. You never know how you're going to do. Maybe she would have lost in the quarters of the warm-up tournament, and then that would have given her more time to practice. But I was surprised, and she gave a lot of credit to her opponent, and she was very good that way. But I didn't feel it wasn't a top of the line performance from Jess. And I think with her game and her, you know, her stature, it probably shouldn't happen. But I really remember thinking at the time that playing the week before might have been one of the chief reasons why this happened.
Yes, agreed. Okay, well, on to the men's then, Steve. I think Jannik and Carlos put on another pretty entertaining display, but this time it wasn't 5 sets, it was 4 sets. And Jannik, in the end, getting revenge for what was a heartbreaking Roland Garros loss in Paris. And I think he was mighty impressive. He broke the 5-match winning streak that Carlos had against him as well. We've talked about it in the past, Carlos being his kryptonite, really, in the last year or so. And I think he put on a very polished display. And there was a moment in the 4th set where you thought it might turn, and he, in his mind, I wondered what he was thinking at serving at 4-3, 15-40.
Right.
There's a very similar position that he was in at Roland Garros, but he managed to get himself out of trouble in really impressive fashion. And after the match, and you were talking about press conference questions, Carlos, of course, came in first and gave his view on the match. And he mentioned that he thought the keys to the match, or the key to the match, actually, the biggest one in his mind was how they both dealt with the second serve points. And he felt that Sinner was a lot more aggressive on the second serve return and was a lot more efficient in those points. And the stats show that. And then for Jannik, I actually put the same question to him, and I said, well, Carlos was in here earlier, and he said that he thought it came down to the second serve points. What do you think? Do you agree with it? What do you think the keys were? And he said, yeah, I think, you know, the serve was definitely a factor during the match, and he felt that both of them didn't serve particularly well in the first set. I think Carlos at the start definitely was, but he tailored off. And then from the second set onwards, he felt that he served better, and then also I think returned the second serve better and from the second set onwards. But he did say, and I think in a very gracious way, that he thought that there were some very small margins, and he said in his words that, quote unquote, he felt he got a bit lucky and hit some lines in some moments and things went his way. But I think that was him being more of a gracious winner than anything. How did you view the match, Steve? Because I wasn't in the stadium. I'm assuming you were. So
yes,
you can give a better view.
No, I mean, no, you described it well. I was in there. Look, I don't entirely agree with that Carlos assessment. I think the serve and the return, it's intertwined. They're connected. Yeah. And because Sinner started serving so well, it got better and better from the second to the third to the fourth, despite the game that you mentioned, because that was really, if you think about it, Sinner got that nice, almost a gift of a break to start the second. Let me just review the match briefly and then try to get to the analysis and comment on what Carlos said. But the first set, Sinner had the break. It looked like it was going to be yet another first set going to Sinner. In the 5 losses, he'd won the first set in all but one. And then the one that he didn't win the first set in Rome, he had a couple of set points that could have given him the first set. So it tends to be that he's the one that gets off to the better start. And we were headed for that. He's up 4-2 and he loses 4 games in a row. And in that 4-game span, he was broken twice. Never again the entire match. That's why I still say the primary factor to me, the chief reason was, yes, returning was important. And no doubt, Carlos is right that Sinner did a better job, more aggressive, more consistent on second serve returns. But I felt that, to me, the really overriding reason that Sinner won was the serving, because he got into a much better rhythm. He wasn't winning free points that much early on, more and more as the match progressed. And I think that then made Carlos a bit anxious, that he wasn't finding the openings to get the breaks the way he has so often in their other matches. So I still would put that as the primary, as the key. I was surprised about that 4-game sequence, but I think Carlos did Jannik a bit of a favor. He started with an immediate double fault first game, second set, went from love 40 back to 30-40, an errant forehand that maybe could have been prevented. So suddenly Sinner can quickly forget about that first set. And then Sinner got out of a break point in the second game. Now, he didn't face any more of those until that 4-3 game in the fourth. So that tells you how incredibly well he served and how well he backed it up for 3 straight sets. And I was just very impressed with that performance. That I remember saying to a friend of mine in an email exchange the night before the match, there's going to be a lot fewer service breaks in this match than there were at Roland Garros. Now, obviously, you some of that is clay versus grass, but I just also had a feeling that it was going to be more that kind of a match. And all credit to Jannik, I think, for the way, because again, once he got the break at the start of the second, he did face a break point in that second game, erased it with a great serve, and kept on, kept control of that set, ended it really with a flourish there with those 3 winners in the 10th game of the second set that really sort of set a certain tone. And then I thought he played a great third, and he got the one break at 4-all and served it out, and then finally got the break early in the fourth. So I think Carlos was under a lot of duress because Sinner wasn't missing much. Sinner had found his range off the ground. He was aggressive. You alluded to Sinner being modest and basically saying he hit a few lines, but part of that was bravery. Sometimes, if it's a big deuce point and you feel like you have to go for that second serve and basically almost hit the sideline, he did that. Okay, that's not all luck. That's also having the guts to try to do it. And I think Sinner that may have been one of the lessons he felt he learned from Paris was, okay, you got to take certain risks at certain times. You're more percentage oriented than Carlos, but there are times when you must take chances. And he did that better in this match than he did in Roland Garros. And I think it's because, Faizan, that he knew this was one of the most important matches he's played in his entire career. It's a Wimbledon final. He'd never been in a Wimbledon final. He's trying to win it for the first time. He's trying to keep Carlos from taking ownership of the tournament and winning a third in a row and perhaps keeping that streak going for a few more years. And, a Bjorn Borg 5-year run or a Roger Federer 5-year run. He may have been headed toward that if Sinner doesn't stop him now. And then it's the streak that you mentioned, the 5-match streak. It was really important to end it. What better place to end it than in a Wimbledon final and to do it in 4 sets? So I think he realized I can't keep making excuses for myself and saying, I played well, my time will come. His attitude was, I will make this happen. I have got to be more assertive. And I even think it showed, Faizan, in his demeanor. There was a certain edge that I liked, chiding himself a few times, talking to his box. There was a more aggressive attitude that I saw from him in this match that transferred to the way he played as well. Back end down the line was just superb the whole match. And I think he beat Carlos to the punch. I think he used that shot more effectively than Carlos did, basically in all 4 sets. So I thought it was an outstanding performance, and I'm excited about it because I think it breathes new life into the rivalry.
Yes.
It sets up a potentially wonderful. Again, we talked about how fun it would be to see Iga and Sabalenka meet it would be just as enjoyable to see these guys have a 3rd straight Grand Slam final and kind of settle it in a way. I mean, obviously if Sinner wins there and he's won 3 of the 4, regardless of what happens in the rankings, he's the best player in the world. Maybe Carlos could still overtake him in the rankings, but I think everybody would look at Sinner as the preeminent player. But if Carlos wins, then Jannik has won Australian Wimbledon, Carlos has won Roland Garros and the Open, and it's like, okay, the battle goes on. But I thought that it was the right result at the right time. And just brings me back to Carlos saying after that, Carlos was so fair-minded after Roland Garros, and they made that comment that stuck with me. The comment about, I'm not going to beat him forever. And that translated, he just meant every time. I'm not beating him every time. He's too good. I got out of this today, and I'm proud that I did, and I'm proud of how I played, but he's too good a player for me to
dominate,
to dominate. I think he knew that he'd been fortunate that was the 5th in a row, and that he knew, looking back on it, to me, Sinner could easily have won two, not just the Roland Garros final. He could have won the Roland Garros semi a year
Beijing one as well.
Beijing, he's 3-love in the tiebreak serving, never wins another point. A double mini break.
Yeah.
Roland Garros last year, 2-1. He's holding serve quite comfortably till late in the 4th, and suddenly Carlos pounced and got a break. And I believe Sinner had a 40-15 lead in that game and lost it, and the set got away, and then he lost in 5. So there were so many of these contests. He certainly should have won at least 2 of the 5, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think Carlos would argue that. Carlos was just proud that he managed to pull those matches out, and Carlos knows he has a knack for being just extraordinary under pressure, that he kind of enjoys the challenge of being there. But and that's why he got so excited in that 4-3 game in the 4th that you mentioned. You could see Carlos getting really exhilarated, sensing the possibility of the match turning swiftly on its head. He couldn't make it happen. That again was all credit to Sinner, that he did not crack at that moment, because it could have gotten very dangerous. Because if it's 4-all and then Carlos, it's a quick hold for 5-4, maybe it ends like the first set and Carlos runs the set. Who knows what happens? Or maybe it goes to a tiebreak and Carlos wins the tiebreak and we're into a 5th, and who knows? It was a critical game. But that to me was also symbolic of the Sinner on that day, the way he was competing and the belief he had in himself, and no panic, and he quickly erased it with 4 straight points. The one I liked the best was a deuce point where he hit a kind of a leaping backhand, a jumping backhand. He left that guy and he was trying to get that little extra pace, and he did. Carlos missed a backhand down the line. That pace, he beat him with pace. So I enjoyed it. I have to say, we are spoiled to see them play final, just the way we were spoiled by the big 3 for so long.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should expect it. We can't expect a 5-set Roland Garros epic every time out, but I thought we got a really first-rate 4-set final. And sometimes that's how it's going to go. Either way, Carlos is there'll be days when he might win in 4 sets in a major final. But I thought from Sinner's end, it was just what he needed to do. He made his move at the most propitious of times. He had to do it then. And I think it's going to carry him into the hardcourt season with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because I was talking about this straight after the final, in that, we have been spoiled because every Grand Slam match these two have played, they've either been 4 or 5 sets. And since the start of their rivalry, in Grand Slams we're talking about. And for the big 3, they had phenomenal matches, but they were also some very one-sided victories.
Yes, right.
For certain players at certain tournaments. Rafa, for example, Roland Garros against Roger, and to name one. So I think,
or Novak when he destroyed Rafa in the 19 Australian final. That can happen. And Rafa destroying Novak in the 20 Roland Garros. There's just going to be days like that.
Yeah.
But not too many, I don't think. And these guys,
no. And that's what's great about this rivalry, that because both of them seem to be so, I think that they really are, at this stage of their career, even this early in their career, all court players. And they've got the skills so quickly, and it could be to do with the fact that the surfaces are more similar than they were a few years back potentially. But either way, I think the skills that they have in both their respective lockers is just incredible, that we do see these even type matches now on all surfaces, which is great to see. And so early in their careers is just, I think, is special. So hopefully that continues. But I think if people shouldn't expect, as you said, for it to be 5-set epics every time, because that's very unrealistic. And even the best rivalries ever in tennis were never like that. So that says something. But I wanted to mention as well.
But
actually,
just,
Steve,
Faizan, just before I forget, hold your thought just for a second. The other thing I just would add to that, and you summed it up so well, is that they've studied each other so carefully.
Yeah.
And you notice that Cahill made that comment about how that Sinner watches more Alcaraz matches than anybody else.
Yes.
So and Sinner has talked last fall, I think around the time of Beijing, about how he thinks all the time about what it's going to take to beat Carlos. Yeah. So they have really. They've been very studious, and I don't know how much tape Carlos has watched of Sinner, but that's a great thing. That's only going to raise the level of their matches. They're going to keep adding these little nuances, and I suspect that tennis will just get better and better between the two.
Yeah, I agree, and part of that is actually one of the points I was going to make is that Jannik in this match, he actually adopted a pattern of play that Carlos normally would adopt in a very efficient way in the majority of his matches, which is the drop shot. And Carlos wasn't really, in my opinion anyway, and I don't know what you thought of it, but Carlos, he wasn't particularly efficient with the drop shot in the final, but Jannik was. And I watched him for multiple practice sessions practicing the drop shot and putting cones out and practicing it. And it's not something that you normally attribute to his game. But at Wimbledon, he was practicing it a lot and he utilized it quite a bit in the final and with great success. So I thought that was a really good tactic that he employed. And he's very brave to utilize that because we know how tough Carlos is to pass at the net, given how good he is normally at the net. And the other point on that is he also came to the net almost double the amount of times that Carlos did in the final.
Yeah.
And before the final, if someone had said, you know what, Jannik's going to come to the net twice as much as Carlos, you would have laughed at them and said, no, he's not. That's not going to happen. So, and not only did he come to the net twice as much, but he also had just a little bit more success in the net as well. I think it was 75% of points won out of those 40. So that to me was incredibly impressive, and it definitely is in line with your thoughts about him being very brave, very, very brave.
It's a reflection, don't you think it's a reflection too, Faizan, that Sinner was hitting the ball so consistently hard and deep that he actually was getting his share of shorter balls or mid-court, but he was creating the openings that really made it an imperative that he did come forward. I mean, there was no backing off, and he approached well and he volleyed well, and it's true. Yeah, I think one of the factors with those, it's true that Carlos didn't have his best day on the drop shot. I think part of it was Sinner was doing a great job of chasing a lot of them down. I thought he was very persistent and letting Carlos know that it better be a perfect drop or he was going to, use his speed and get there and try to win the point. That was helpful. Sinner used it selectively well himself. But I thought that Carlos, sometimes he's very relaxed and he feels like guys are not going to chase. He knew that Sinner would. So that was my feeling about why that contributed to Carlos's woes on the drop shot that day.
Yeah, for sure. Were you impressed with Sinner's composure at the net as well, though, and his use of the drop shot?
Sinner's
composure at the net and also his use of the drop shot?
Yeah, no, I thought he's forcing himself now. It's not something he really particularly enjoys doing, but he realizes he's got to add that element. So I thought he did a great job, and his feel was good. And at the net, he did a great job. There was one missed overhead but otherwise, the volley was sound, and he did hit some good smashes, and he anticipated well up at the net. He did a great job. He even the point that took him to 40 love in the last game was interesting. He hit that angled forehand volley, semi drop volley, but he didn't try to make it too good, play it too fine. And I think in the back of his mind, he knew Carlos might get there, and he did. But then obviously Sinner was perfectly poised and then angled the backhand volley crosscourt, which Carlos chased again, but really to no avail. So I felt like his execution at the net that day was quite remarkable.
Yeah, agreed. I was very impressed with that. And actually, the overhead that he missed was after he hit and in between the legs, half volley tweener,
Right.
which would have been a great highlight reel if it'd come off.
Yeah, exactly. But no, all told, look, his ability to go forward, to take anything short. I'd be interesting to see if they did play at the Open again, whether he is able to come forward almost as much as he did at Wimbledon, and a lot will depend on the quality of his ground game and how deep and how consistent he is with his depth. But that's something he almost always does well, and I think that's something he wants to make sure that he's the aggressor as much as possible now, and not let Carlos outmaneuver him.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's a clear game plan to try and dictate in the points as much as possible and be the one going line first or taking the risk of being braver first, I think, in the points like you mentioned. And I think that was there's clear intent there. And actually, Cahill and Vagnosi said in the press conference that the only thing they'd really talked about to do with Roland Garros lost was actually around being brave or braver in the really important points and going for your shots. And I think maybe Jannik, that resonated with Jannik going into this final, that actually in the tight moments, in the crucial moments, not to be passive. And that was very apparent throughout.
By playing that way, I think he didn't allow Carlos to release that full range of his artistry. He restricted him in a way, and that was highly impressive.
100%. Were you a little bit surprised about Carlos's, I would say, underuse of the backhand slice? Because I was expecting him to utilize it a bit more in the final, and when I did a preview for it, I was expecting him to use that as part of his variety, but in the end, he didn't actually utilize it at all, really.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
Yeah.
I was surprised. But I also have to believe that there had to be a reason. That wasn't something you just would forget about. Somehow he and Ferrero had determined that it was not going to work. Why? I don't know. But he hardly utilized it at all. So somehow they must have believed that Sinner was going to that wasn't going to break up his rhythm enough, and it was not going to be in Carlos's best interest. But you have to wonder, looking back, on why they decided that, why they believed that.
Yeah, for sure. So 8-5 now is the head-to-head. That's Jannik just eating back into it. On the men's side, I mean, who impressed you, Steve, in the time you were at Wimbledon, and maybe any surprises?
No, I mean, obviously I was impressed for Sinner for Fritz to survive those two marathons, the first couple of rounds, and then get some breaks along the way and start playing some of his best tennis and make his way all the way to the semifinals. And that's the breakthrough semifinal for him at Wimbledon after a couple of quarters, and then to play. Frankly, I didn't think he'd do as well against Alcaraz as he did. I really didn't. Going in, I thought, okay, maybe he steals a set. I thought more likely it was going to be a 4-6-3 or a 4-6-5, but that Carlos would win in straight. The outside chance, but Taylor fully earned the second set after being outplayed thoroughly in the first. He started returning better in the second. He threatened 2 service games in a row, and then finally in the last one, he broke Carlos to win that second set. He outplayed him in the second clearly, and then it was interesting with the he took a bathroom break, and I thought he got up to kind of a wobbly start in the third, and Carlos pounced again, and then we had the really interesting fourth with both holding all the way through, and Taylor coming from 1-4 to lead 6-4 in that tiebreak, and I thought he probably should have won that breaker. I mean, Carlos, again, the survival instincts kicked in, and he did a nice job of giving nothing away, but Taylor had his openings and hit a pretty good serve on that first set point, and Carlos' return kind of floated back, and I wish Taylor would have done a bit more with that first backhand, with a more aggressive backhand off that Alcaraz return. Maybe he takes that set, and I still would have liked Alcaraz to win in the fifth. We know what he's 14-1 or 15-1 in five sets. We know how great he is, but I would have liked for Taylor to have given himself that opportunity. Nonetheless, it's more impressive. He did better, obviously, than he did in the U.S. Open final when he lost in straight to Sinner. And better than he'd done in the few matches he'd played against Carlos in the past, where he looked outclassed. So I think he does come away with some encouragement, and should. And the Taylor Fritz of early 2025 is gone. Now he's really playing great tennis again. The grass court season was a big, big success. The 2 titles and this. So I'll be interested to see. I mean, he's now sort of confirming himself as a top 5 player, and he loves playing in the States. He loves hard courts. Should do well over the summer. Should do well at the Open. Again, can he replicate getting back to the finals of the Open? I still think the odds are against that, but I do believe he'll go quarters or semis, very likely. So
yeah,
I agree. I was really impressed that he made his way into the semis, that he got there. And the other memory I have on the sadder note is that Djokovic, I felt, played really well in the early rounds. I thought he was terrific against Dan Evans and Kecmanovic, and obviously, slow start against De Minaur, but did a nice job to turn that around and win in 4. And then Cavalli, the match you and I watched together, 4-setter. Not his best, but I thought, okay, he's getting tested a bit here in these last 2 rounds, and it probably would do him good. And I was hoping that the fall that you and I watched him take near the end of the Cavalli match, it wouldn't be too serious. He was able to get back up and win the last 2 points to close out the match from there. But I thought that to me was the saddest match to watch, because it was so clear that he mobility wise, he seemed to be about 60%. He was so limited in his ability to change direction. The lateral movement was just nothing like normal. And then he's being forced to serve and volley much more than he would have chosen to. There was a stage there in the second set where sometimes he'd do it 4 points in a row and you'd just be shaking it. And you knew that was because he felt it was a necessity, not because he really wanted to. So I thought that was too bad. I was hoping, win or lose, that we could see more of a Djokovic that we saw against Sinner in Paris. Because that, to me, was a very entertaining, well-played match. He lost in straight, but he played better than the scoreline would tell you. And the last 2 sets were quite good, which he lost 5 and 6. So that I thought was unfortunate. That semi, I mean, I got more than I expected from Fritz against Alcaraz, less than I hoped for from Djokovic against Sinner, because I thought, okay, the odds would favor Jannik to win, but that Novak was going to make it very competitive, and with some luck, maybe even pulls it off. But that match was you could just feel it. And even when Djokovic went up 3-love with a break point for 4-love in the third, you didn't feel it was going to last. And once he didn't get the second break, you could see the set was going to slip away swiftly, which it did. So I thought that was one of the sadder parts of Wimbledon, because he was geared up for that tournament and pointing toward it, and all along in his mind and the minds of many others too, that this was going to be his best chance at a major. And the body let him down again, as it did in Australia. And that's happening a lot. Didn't seem 100% at the Open when he lost to Poprin, and he was playing with that knee and whatever that wrapping was, and the knee at the Wimbledon final against Carlos. And for 2 sets, he didn't look well. Really, that whole match, he never looked quite like himself. So you can go back over all these majors, and the French Open of a year ago when he had a default out of the quarterfinals, and he just hasn't been 100% physically, probably in any major going back to the beginning of 2024. So that, I think, he's clearly weighing on his mind.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely a shame to see, but I think for Novak, as he said in the post-match press conference, it's unfortunately something that he has to come to terms with in terms of knowing his age and his body. But
yeah, I like that. Yeah. I like that he said that, Faizan, that he said that he kind of dismissed the idea that it was just bad luck, and he said, no, it's age. Yeah. It's age too. And that was good, because that means that he's looking at it realistically.
Exactly.
And therefore, we'll see what his self-assessment is after the Open, depending on how he does. But I think what we all lose sight of that on the positive side is the notion of this guy at 38. Granted, he was still 37 in Australia when he got to the semis, but he had turned 38 by Roland Garros. So to be getting to all 3 semis at his age, that's no mean feat. That's still pretty remarkable stuff.
Exactly, 100%. I think, he is he's had an incredible career, and I think in his mind he's clearly frustrated with the fact that he looks after his body so much off court. And he said in his press conference that he would challenge anyone on tour to look after their body as much as he does, or put in as much work as he does, and that's very apparent actually when you for anyone that likes watching practice sessions and goes and watches. I mean, he spends so much time, and this is excluding the time that he spends at home or wherever he's staying, warming up or doing yoga or getting massages, etc. So much time in the warm-up tent before actually going out onto court. Carlos and Jannik and all these guys, everyone, they do spend some time in there, but it is a fraction of the time that Novak spends in there. And we're not talking about him, doing sprints, or it's all mobility type work and all stretching and warming up and hand-to-eye coordination, and then he goes out onto court. So it's a very long preparation. And whenever I'd get the practice schedule, you'd see his block would always be longer than the others. And it's not because he would necessarily be hitting for longer, but his preparation around it.
Yeah.
He's so meticulous.
Yeah, it is. And the ultimate professional. So I think in that sense, he feels cheated. On the other hand, he realizes how long he's been able to sustain this excellence. He's appreciative that he's gone this far into his career. But let's face it, you go back to even the 21 Australian when he got hurt against Fritz.
Yeah.
And had barely enough to get through that in 5 after winning the first 2 sets, and he screamed out after the match. It was the crowd had left, and it was during COVID, and they'd had to be sent home at a certain hour, so there was no crowd left at the end of that match, and he just screamed in utter relief. And then he eventually went on and won the title over Medvedev, but there were the days off. He wasn't practicing, so he had to sort of work his way through with a lot of discipline there. Same thing in 23 at the Australian, another leg injury. And same deal. He had to be very careful, and he had to, he'd heard it in the tournament before the Australian Open, and there were some questions then about could he make it through there, and he did. But the point is, so it's been creeping up on him in a way. I look back on those times and say, okay, he was good enough to get through then, but then every year that passes, it's going to get tougher.
Yeah, so, and also I feel like he was good enough to get through against those guys, but Carlos and Jannik are a different level at the moment. He said that himself. He said there's several levels. He himself, Novak said, I'm not sure, I'm not, who am I to disagree with him? He said that he thinks that there's several levels above the rest of the field. And interestingly, when they asked him before, I think it was after his quarterfinal win, so prior to him playing Jannik, he said, if I want to win Wimbledon, I have to beat Jannik, and then I have Carlos waiting for me in the final. And obviously, I remember one of the American journalists saying, Novak doesn't think very highly of Taylor, does he? Because he essentially assumes Carlos is going to get through.
That's true. But of course, the irony of that comment is that you had Grigor was almost surely going to beat Sinner.
Yes.
On the center court there in the round of 16. And
what a level he showed.
Great level, fantastic level. But you look at that match and say, okay, Jannik was worried about his elbow. He'd had the trainer out for his elbow. He didn't know what he was dealing with yet, but that weighs on your mind when you're worried that it could be something serious and your opponent is beating you to a pulp, which is what was happening. So I don't really think he would have come out of that match, and then Novak would not have had to play both. But on the other hand, then there's no ignoring that Novak had taken the fall, and so he was, whoever he played, even if it wasn't Sinner in the semi, he was going to still be struggling with that, with his mobility that restricted. So he wasn't in a position to take it to do himself justice, no matter whether he was playing Sinner or anybody else in the semifinal. So that was unfortunate, but definitely was a moment. I mean, I'm sure that Sinner will look back on that tournament, be grateful to know that he somehow escaped that day, because he was well on his way to defeat. And I don't think this was a time when he was going to stage a spectacular comeback from 2 sets down. I don't think he believed it, and his comments afterwards indicated that Yeah, you know, he said it didn't feel like a victory, and I thought that was a nice way for him to handle it.
Yeah, 100%. Were you surprised? Well, I was going to ask about Dimitrov. I mean, obviously it was a bit of a heartbreaker for him, and he's not going to be out for a little bit of time. But that's the best I think I've seen him play at a Grand Slam for a number of years. I mean, he was regularly serving past the 140 mile per hour mark, and it wasn't just to do with the speed of serve, but it was the way that he was attacking the net, the forehand.
Yeah.
And he normally hits the backhand slice a lot, which on grass is great, but he's actually going over the backhand a lot and actually hitting a lot of backhand returns very aggressively on the up and driving through the ball and causing Jannik a lot of problems. So he was essentially playing on the front foot, and I get that Jannik was maybe not playing he wasn't playing at full speed because of his fall in the first game, but I felt like Dimitrov's level was still very, very high.
Oh no, it was outstanding, and but 5 Grand Slam tournaments in a row with injuries. He's had just far too many things go wrong with him. This sport is so cruel because these guys are all so susceptible to it. No matter how much they train, no matter how much their physios try to put them in a position to prevent injuries, you can't. I've always said that I see tennis is in essence as being a contact sport because what they do to their bodies and what they're asking of their bodies, and the game has reached a level in physicality that we've never seen before. So, but the flip side of that is that these guys can get hurt so easily, and it can turn in an instant, like it did with Grigor at the end of that match. Suddenly, he hits that serve and he's down on the ground and in terrible pain and pretty much knowing that he's not going to be able to complete that match. So that's that. And I don't think there are any solutions to this. The game, it's going to keep happening. And that'll be the long-term question with Carlos and Jannik too. Can they avoid serious injuries, long-term injuries, things that are going to keep them out of majors? I hope it doesn't happen too often to them.
Yeah, agreed, especially as you said, the sport has become more and more physical. So yes, you have your specific now physio trainers in each team, and the teams are getting bigger and bigger as a lot of people, players, and also coaches have been saying. But that doesn't stop the fact that at the end of the day, everyone's still human. So they have their limits. But Steve, I really appreciate your time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, I think more specifically around your experience at Wimbledon, the days that you were there. You mentioned about your favorite women's match. What was the match that really stood out to you on the men's side?
The final, without a doubt, because it's such a treat to watch them play. To see them meeting in the follow-up to the Roland Garros, to see Sinner play at such a high level, it seems like an odd choice, maybe since it was a 4-setter, not a 5-setter. But I that one just stands out to me above the rest without any doubt. 2 best players in the world, 2nd straight major final, 1st Wimbledon title for Sinner, high quality tennis throughout, especially from him. That's my most powerful memory.
Yeah, agreed. Just stopping Alcaraz from the three-peat at Wimbledon as well. So there was a lot on the line, I think, for both players, but especially I think for Jannik. So, and as you mentioned before, I think the rivalry really needed this. This was the best outcome for the rivalry. Because if Carlos had won, obviously it would have been great. But I think in terms of the actual rivalry, the dynamic of it was great. And what's even better, Steve, is that for once I got a prediction right, and I said Sinner in 4 sets, and I got it right. And before the tournament, I also said Sinner to beat Alcaraz. So I'm happy that for once I got a prediction right. So
well done. Your instincts are good. I was the final comment. I just was a little concerned about Sinner. The psychological baggage he was carrying with him onto the court, and he'd been but maybe the fact that he'd been so honest about how hard it was to deal with that, and how he had to get back into good practice sessions, and he did, but not lying and talking about the sleepless nights that he had following that. I think that may have been therapeutic for him. So by the time he got out there, he was able to produce his best, and there's no doubt it's the best result for tennis, and there's no doubt that Carlos will come back at him too, but that this rivalry will will be headed to another level. This rivalry will benefit from the Sinner victory, and we're going to see a lot of blockbusters with these two guys in the months and years to come.
100%. Steve, as always, great speaking to you, and appreciate your time and being on the podcast as well.
Well, thank you, Faizan. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy these post-major discussions we have, and it was good catching up at Wimbledon.
100%. Hopefully, maybe we'll see you at the US Open. Who knows? We'll see. Thanks so much, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Faizan.